the world top smartphone market in the world. And anybody want to take a wild guess? Which country is the top smartphone browser in the world?
France?
Yeah, right.
Philippines?
Definitely not.
China.
It's China. That's right. China actually about 6 months ago have actually took the #1 spot over the US as the
Is that total number of devices or per device per person?
total numbers of
Per
devices.
person of other countries.
I think definitely. Last year I did a little world tour and went to Indonesia and like a lot of Southeast Asian countries. You go there, they will have a BlackBerry and they will have something else. And same thing for China as well. Yeah.
You said you went to China 2 months after you launched?
Say that again.
Did you say you guys went to China 2 months after you launched?
No, we went to China 2 years later after we launched in the US. But have a lot to do with, like at the time, we started when we were only 3,000 apps, right? So in the world, there's no Android phone other than in the US. So we basically, our strategy, not just for Asia in general, because we're so Android focused, the way that we decide to go to a new country is on a macro level, we look at, okay, other than the US, where we started, where else in terms of Android phone is growing? So China definitely, in last year we see really, really strong growth in Russia, Brazil, Indonesia, and India. These are the 4 countries other than Brazil. I actually personally went to and study these markets and really kind of think through what are some of the things that we need to do. But for us, and also on top of that, because most of these countries, except China, pretty much is Google Play and App Store. So without even us doing anything, we already see really strong growth in these countries. That's how we sort of decide, now we need to think about this country. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit more details of how we get into these countries, but at the same time, I will encourage a lot of you, when you first sort of, develop, since we're in the Valley, of course you're going to start developing in English. But I think, a couple of our colleagues who sort of during the talk, there's definitely, the top countries, pretty much other than, US and UK and Australia, all the other top smartphone countries in the world are not English speaking. So, and especially for China, Japan, and Korea, it's just that you have to develop and really think about, what you need to do. So China is the #1 in terms of smartphone market. And then just a quick note, as I mentioned before, I think other than, these are like the fastest growing smartphone market. So other than Philippines, which actually speak English, all the other countries in terms of fastest growing, they're not English speaking. So you can imagine, Jan sort of talked about, App Store, sort of SEO, the keyword optimization. When they're going to search, their phone setting is going to be in their local language. So you can imagine when they search, it's going to use the keyword on the local languages, and that's why it's very, very important to not just optimize App Store in English, but all the other languages as well. A couple other things which I found it really, really fascinating. Today I was actually tweeted Ben Evans talking about how active smartphone plus tablet combined is about 700 million devices in China, which is pretty much double the population of the US. But still, having said that, it's still not mature yet, which means that there's a huge gap in terms of growth. Even though with 700 million devices, it's still not even 60% of the population. I want to say probably about 30 to 40%. And then US is about almost saturated with 60%. So it's still, in terms of growth rate, you will see countries like China, India. India is just insane in terms of growth. And that has a lot to do with now they're building out infrastructure for LTE and 4G. There's a lot of really exciting growth that is outside this country. A couple other things to think about when I talk to most of the developers around the world, other than after the US, particularly for game developers, they like to look at Japan. Japan is actually the #1 smartphone country in terms of ARPU. People in Japan love playing games. And I'm sure that you guys have seen Gung Ho, which is the top 2, if not top 1, in terms of game developers in the world. And then also, look other than that is South Korea, US, UK, Germany. in many ways, these countries are also where Dolphin is strong in, other than US and China, Japan, Korea, UK, US, France, also are strong countries in terms of our total user base. Another piece of data from Flurry, this is very, very interesting. Korea, even in front of the US, is the most saturated market in the world in terms of smartphone. Well, you can pretty much figure why, because of Samsung. And so pretty much like for me, whenever I travel to all these different countries, here definitely is iPhone dominated, iOS dominated. But if you go to Hong Kong, where I'm from originally, or Korea, you stand there in a train, everybody are using some sort of Galaxy. Even Galaxy Note, bigger the better. They just like gigantic phone. I don't understand why you can't even put it in a pocket. But anyway, so they just love smartphone, which equal to a lot of opportunities for you and I to think about how do we actually grow there, because they are hungry, really, really hungry for new apps and new games. Right, so just sort of like Neil Armstrong, right? And like small little steps could mean like a giant leap forward for your app. And since we don't necessarily have a whole lot of time, I didn't, just not all my other colleagues have very, very detailed things for you to think about. But I found this particular graph, actually a diagram, is created by a company called Fortuno. The CEO actually just moved here from Eastern Europe to here. They created this because they really want to help all of us to think about China. And I emphasize China because I don't know if you guys have read recently, China per day, in terms of volume, particularly focus on Android install, is about 50% of Google Play. So just China, one country, is 50% of the entire Google Play install per day. Well, I say China because, well, you guys may or may not remember, Google actually got kicked out of China, so there's no Google Play in China. So what leads to, in order to, and on top of that, I want to, even I'm Chinese, I actually didn't realize until I was having some conversation with my fellow Chinese friends. It's not only because Google got kicked out of China. In developing countries, China, India, Russia, and Indonesia, these sort of gigantic countries, the credit card penetration is really, really low. So when smartphone first launched, it's not because they really want to jailbreak, it's because they don't even have the credit card to sign up for an iTunes account for Apple. So there's no way for them to download an app after they purchase the phone. So which leads into the whole new industry of third-party app store, particularly in China. So up there, and I apologize for like a small font, now 91360, Wandoujia, Tencent, and then D.cn, these are the top 5 third-party app store in China. So of course they don't have like the same number of apps that we have on iOS or on Google Play, but they have a good number, right? Like about 500,000 apps that's on there. A lot of them, yes, is locally produced by local Chinese app developer, but there are many, many, many apps. And in fact, if you guys want to know about game particularly, you can talk to my friend Jason, who's standing there looking at his phone, of course. My colleague's actually from China. He's moving here because he wants to learn about the US environment. But he's definitely the expert. You can just ask him, don't ask me. But all these app stores, and Jan and I constantly arguing, oh, maybe we should like create another company, maybe like an app network, like a mobile for China. It's very, very difficult because each of these app stores is sort of like a giant, like a mountain, where a castle. So for us, for Dolphin, we have to maintain concurrently about like 10 or 15 APK at the same time, because each of these guys want us to implement their own billing and their own sort of like their own little ad network to sort of cross-promote within the same ecosystem. So in order for us to sort of survive or drive install, we have to maintain all these different versions. And they don't have like a combined SDK or all that. So it's a lot of work, but at the same time it's worth it because it's the same thing that Bob probably later on will talk about. You build a relationship. Ideally, if anybody asks me if you have the relationship with Google Play at the tutorial side or Apple App Store, if they're willing to feature you, awesome, right? That's probably trump all the other dollar that you would spend on all the other platforms. But if you don't, what do you do? And which leads into all the different strategies we talked about. But with China, it's the same thing, but we just have to repeat it like 15 times to make sure that we get features and we're buying sort of like the right kind of ad in each of these platforms. And then, other than that, in terms of user acquisition, play well on all these third-party app stores. Are there any mobile ad network? Absolutely, there are some. But I think most of the energy when you go into China is to focus on these third-party app stores. And then one other thing that is quite unique, and I don't necessarily like to say is developing country versus developed country or China versus US. But every single new country, if you decide to go into, my decision-making point is very simple. When a normal user going to a new country, do the carrier subsidize the phone or not? If they do, then, which is sort of in the US case, right? Most of the guys you get your phone pretty much free or highly subsidized by the carriers, then pretty much like you will shift your focus in terms of should you talk to OEM more or should you talk to carrier more? So in countries like India, Russia, China, Indonesia, pretty much most of 90% of the time, people actually go buy SIM card and phone completely unbundled. Which means that if you want a sort of the preload, in China it's like this ZTE, Lenovo, Huawei, Coolpad, this list of all these different carriers, they actually, not carrier, the OEM, the manufacturer, they have a lot of say. And it's actually an existing business model for you to go to them and say, hey, I would like to pay for a preload. They happily take your money. And in fact, they can do that. So looking at the food chain, here we also talked to the carrier as well, but I found it very, very difficult to work with them. OEM certainly, but more for sort of the country where the carrier will subsidize. And then one of the new found, which Jason is an expert on this, is the whole we call it, in the US we call it silo, but it's not really silo, but when I go and talk to a shopkeeper and I'm buying this phone, and because most of these countries, they have no idea what a smartphone is. So for the first time they bought an Android phone, they were like, what do I do now, right? And during that conversation, I will basically, tell my friend, hey, can you give me some app? And I swear to God, it doesn't matter, you go to China, Russia, which we did the same thing, Indonesia, they literally have a sign, say, give me $5, I'll give you 100 free songs, 100 free app. And then when we went to these countries, we were like, how do you get all these apps? And well, we just have it. Do you have copyright of this? And like, well, it's copyright. So they basically, and for us as a developer, we're like, how do we get in this list? So we're, have a large team working on this and making sure that even for a channel like that, we're going to be part of this list that really, really grassroots. But interestingly, that's how a lot of these apps get on the phone that your customers is using. And then on the right-hand side, just saw that the AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, there's China Telecom, China Unicom, China Mobile, which are sort of the three big. And many of you actually saw the news with Tim Cook, with Apple signing the deal with China Mobile. I saw another very interesting piece of statistics yesterday, how about 27% of sort of the higher end phone, which is $500 above, 27% of the high-end phone in China are actually Apple, like iPhone. Which means, historically, and this is definitely an Android country, I think because Apple now have a deal with China Mobile, that could change. But definitely something to think about. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, in terms of mobile OS, it's pretty much 90.1% Android focus. And in fact, that's pretty much true for the big part of the world that is Android dominant. Just want to give you guys a quick screenshot of like how an app store look like in China. This is actually a screenshot of 9.1. And if you guys have read the news about 9 months ago, 9.1, not like the Facebook with WhatsApp $19 billion, but these guys got bought by Baidu for $1.9 billion. And purely like app app store, mostly on the Android, but they also have the channel of the sort of the retail channel as well. So when you go on this, you can talk to an editorial, very similar the way that we do it in the States, right? You get featured, or you can actually pay for, advertising spots, and or they also sort of build up their own network similar to what people do like with Chart Boost, right? But instead, a Chart Boost is sort of cross many apps and drive install back to Google Play or Apple App Store. They drive it back to their own app store, the third-party app store where they originally from. I also took a quick screenshot, but this is Coco China. It's a forum. I think in the US as well, like our team, we have like a complete separate team for Dolphin that do user acquisition. We do, participate a lot on forums, but in China particularly, there's like our whole team in China is like every day and trying to like look for places where I don't know how many of you actually use WeChat or Weibo or know any of these, but basically there's like the Twitter of China, there's like the WhatsApp of China. All these other channels, we want to make sure that there's a lot of mention of Dolphin and make sure people are aware of this. And so let's move on. Next, this is just a few handful of OEMs that we actually work with. Sometimes it takes a lot of sort of negotiation. We don't necessarily pay all of them, but we do. They all expected us to pay, so it's sort of up to you, which Bob will mention a little bit more, is what kind of value that can you provide other than just purely kind of treating these guys as another mobile ad network. So not because I have really limited time. I think that many of you may sort of get quite overwhelmed because first off, knowing what I know now, and even I'm Chinese, sometimes it is really difficult to go overseas. And in fact, many of us are pretty indie developer, right? So if you don't have a big team, of course you can talk to one guy and see how you can do that. But at the same time, it's a lot of work, and you sort of don't know if you should go there or this country or that country. So usually I have just like a little cheat I would do if I were you is before you translate the whole thing, which is all these like text strings and things that you have to think about, I would just translate the app description. And yes, many people have argued with me, said, well, your user is going to be very unhappy when they download it because it's not their language. But you know what? It's going to be even more work for you to support all these languages and all these stuff. Right? So usually my suggestion is translate the app description. And because they do search in their local language, and immediately you can see which country have like a better uptake than others. So you can get a better sense, oh great, now I should probably go to Brazil before I go to Spain, like things like that. You can sort of test it right away and with a lot less work. And this is like a laundry list of things that you need to think about when you translate an app. I'm not going to go through all these. But having said that, I think for us, when we first went to China, we pretty much just translate straight off Dolphin's browser and put it in on the Chinese App Store, and it actually didn't work. It took us about almost a year to rebuild our app, and what we did was we went interview sort of local taxi driver, like all the waiter, waitresses, like just normal people, and watch them and understand how they actually use a browser. And right now, I don't recommend everybody does it, but we do a completely different code base. One is for Chinese and one is for US. And then US, so international version applied to the rest of the world. Just because we realize it's not just localization, but it's culturalization. You need to think about how people actually use photos, how do people play games, and like, especially for game developer, they don't celebrate Christmas, and they don't celebrate 4th of July or Easter. So instead they have Chinese New Year, and they go climb the mountains and pay respect to the dead people. There's many like really interesting sort of festival that you need to think about and really culturalize the app. So this is a quick screenshot of like the result of Dolphin. On the left-hand side, left to you, is Dolphin US, and on the right-hand side, which looks like almost like a launcher, this is also Dolphin, but Dolphin China. One other thing that I saw a couple weeks ago, LinkedIn decided to go into China. And I don't know if you guys saw that, they completely renamed LinkedIn to some, like I can't even pronounce, because LinkedIn itself means nothing in the Chinese language. So they literally have to translate even like the brand of it, so the local will get it. That's probably is a little you don't have to do it for the rest of the world, but if you go into these countries, you have to think about that. So I'm gonna quickly end with things that you have to think about if you decided to go into a new country. This actually, I think, applies to not just for app developers, but for any sort of business when you go overseas. I always like to start with just, this is on top of product, right? So on the marketing side, you have to think about user acquisition, email marketing, social media, website. And by the way, like for us, we have about 200 emails that we get through customer service per day. We have like an army of 3 or 4 people. That's all they do all day long is answer emails. The minute that we launch in there's Arabic and the Russian, we start getting these emails. I have no idea what they're talking about, and I just forward it to our specialists. But even they are having a hard time. So think about once you start localizing, you're going to have all these issues around like PR. Now you're going to get coverage locally. Now you're going to have customer service. You need to answer in 4 languages. And then last but not least, with new legal stuff, especially in Asian countries, there's all kind of IP. People are going to start copying you, what you're going to do. So these are all the different things you need to think about before you actually go into a new country. So with that, I will take any question that you may have. Yes?
Are you familiar with the transition that Instagram did? Like, for example, Instagram, they released internationally first, then came to the US. So I'm kind of curious, like, their success story and how they able to manage that. If you're familiar with it.
No, I'm actually not. So the question is, am I familiar with the Instagram story in terms of how they expand internationally? No, I actually don't know. If you would love to share.
No, I was just asking, I was asking, I was more curious. If they released international first, they didn't get to the US. So they pretty much had a lot of users before they came over here. So
Cool.
it seems like I know it's a tough market to get into, so I was kind of curious, like, how did they break down that barrier before, they released it in the US? I was asking.
I can't speak on the Instagram because I'm not familiar with that story, but I do have a quick question. Is Instagram, Jason, is Instagram popular in China? Not right now. So, but having said that, Flappy Bird, quite popular in China. Okay, so she said it is. I'll actually quickly talk about Flappy Bird because I read that story, and it's very interesting because when they first released, for the first 6 months, nobody cares about it at all. And in fact, like the people who actually start playing Flappy Bird was actually in Europe. I don't know if they actually exactly translate into all the European languages, but the reason that they took off was a couple of things. One was, and actually a particular person tweeted about it, and there was a video that featured sort of that particular gameplay, and then it really took off in the US. So I don't know what will be I don't know if that really answers your questions, but for us, we started in the US and then we go outwards, but I'm happy to hear any other story if any of you guys started internationally first. Question that you had.
How about the tension? I tend to think in terms of tension, but I don't know if it's the right word. Between focusing in one language against focusing in one country. It might make sense to focus on countries when you go abroad because there is a legal stuff where the press is focused on countries. But for example, I came from South America, big user and fan of Dolphin, probably. Any country from South America might not be relevant in terms of volume, but if you take all the Spanish-spoken countries, might be a relevant market. What do you think about this?
I actually think that I completely agree with you. If you are translating to Spanish, you can hit many different countries in South America, except Brazil, I guess. The way that I sort of look at the world is English speaking, and then I sort of look at Europe. It's very similar to Southeast Asia, which many different countries and many different languages. So it's sort of, and yes, French. Pain in the butt actually to sort of think about these two regions, right? And China is sort of on its own. I do think Spanish is a very logical, because with English it's sort of similar in terms of even like placement of the language itself. It's a very sort of natural way to look at it. But I also like to, because we make a lot of decisions on how much money we spend in each region. Right? So a lot of people, we basically look at, okay, great, we think India or we think like South America is awesome in terms of growth, but the ARPU is really low. So then we're like, I don't know if I even want to spend money on advertising to drive. So we do have Spanish-speaking, Spanish language for Dolphin, but we don't spend much advertising dollars or effort to grow that market because the ARPU is still very low, similar to India. So now it's really all up to you when you're sort of looking at what's your LTV, right? I mean, he was teaching us about the LTV. You have to do it by country and to really kind of think through, and then you decide your international sort of strategy. But in general, for us, US definitely, Japan, and then after that it's actually China in terms of our ARPU and then the net worth of that user. Europe is quite similar to the US generally, and then Southeast Asia is kind of low, and then South America and Southeast Asia to us is sort of similar in terms of the ARPU for per user. That and then.
When you went to China and you noticed on the third-party app stores, in terms of like advertising or creative, were there any like general nuances? You mentioned like you had to basically redesign Dolphin for China based on how people are using your browser or using their phone. Is there any nuances as far as the creative or advertising within the stores that you've seen is generally different from like the US or?
There's so many nuances, it's not even funny. And I think that I deserve another topic just one day, just for China to say, I'm going to let you guys talk. You have to talk. Because there's many nuances. And in fact, just the other, anyway, like even like my friends the other way around when they come this way, the other day my cousin was saying, hey, did you cook this by yourself? Or did you cook it yourself? It's two different things, right? So there's all these little words that you definitely cannot do that through Google Translate. That's why one scan exists. But there's so many nuances in terms, and also quickly on game particularly, Chinese people are really willing to do MMORPG, and they love to show off. This is one little nuance, like my friends from Tencent, which is, I don't know, Tencent, they're huge. So they have many games, and one of their games, when you first create sort of in session, you have an avatar, and that avatar is completely naked. And so you're like, don't look so good, right? So pretty much everybody will immediately buy little goods, like virtual goods to wear the clothes, so you look better. And also, like the Chinese gamer are absolutely willing to cheat. Like if I can buy this and I can increase like 500 levels, I do that. Here is not like that. Here is just, I'm gonna work on this, right? Or I pay a little bit more so I can go there faster. Chinese gamer, I'm going to have 1,000 steps ahead and then look good in front of all my friends because it's MMO. I'll do that. So in some way, the psychology is a little bit different, so to just jump ahead, but they're willing to pay. And of course, a few of you who's from China probably may or may not agree with me, but just from as an outsider sometimes, I'm like, this is how you think. So it's not just the nuances of the language or the graphic, it's the incentive itself and the psychology of they want to show off. And then on top of that, China in general, and same thing for most of the Southeast, like Asia, is most people are stuck in traffic. Most of in the US, you're driving, right? You don't play games while you're driving. Are you crazy? But over there, you're stuck on a train or a bus. You at least spend 2 or 3 hours of your life, like playing games or meetings. So they have plenty of free times. And then also they have plenty of sort of like other income to spend, because it's not like the US is pretty high level of quality of life. Over there, like especially second tier city, they don't have anywhere else to spend money. So they're always looking at their phone and want to show off their friends at how great they are at this game. So there's like sort of nuance of the psychology itself that will drive through your marketing decision. All right, last question, and then we'll go to
So, so it's an interesting thing to go to a big device manufacturer and get 10 million installs straight off packaged with the device. Do you have to pay for that entire 10 million installs upfront, or is there a pay as you go when the activation happens, or how does the deal structure is important, right? Otherwise you have to come up with $700,000.
Yeah. So the question is, when you work with OEM or carriers, you need to pay up front. The answer is, of course they're going to ask, but everything is negotiable, and I will never pay up front. Otherwise, you go broke. I think that in working with OEM and carriers, it doesn't, not just for China, right? We deal with Russians and other area of the world. Everything is negotiable. I'm going to actually let Bob to tell us all these nuances about partnership. But at least like for us, it's not even the money. If I'm knowing what I know now, I probably, and please don't quote me, I probably wouldn't spend energy on that. Because it's not like these OEM is hardware. Every single time when they preload something, they have to test us. And then we already know some of our OEM partners, they make a model 3 months later. Can you imagine if you have the energy to spend on just like doing mobile advertising and you get instant gratification and tons of install? Whatever I work on with an OEM today, I won't even see it till 3 or 6 months later. It's painful and it's a lot of work. And I think that if you get a certain scale, awesome. But if I was stack rank all these channels, that would be the last thing I ever do. So, anyway, hopefully that answers your questions. And with that, thank you very much. And now I'm going to bring up Bob.